Richard, can you hear me?
Just try to stay calm.
Pupils are fixed and dilated.
Give me the clamp.
Hello? La da 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 dum.
He was gasping for air. Not the kind of gasping that comes after a sprint or a panic attack, but something deeper, rawer, more final. The paramedic's voice echoed faintly over the siren, but Richard Keller couldn't answer. His mouth moved. Nothing came out. "Sir, can you speak to me? Can you tell me your name?" The man in the worn flannel shirt and faded jeans blinked slowly, his lips trembling as if the very effort to form a sound was painful. His hands clutched the edge of the gurney, not out of fear, but frustration. His throat burned like fire. Not the kind you can soothe with tea and honey. This was the kind that felt like it had been smoldering quietly for decades, waiting for a moment to explode. The ambulance bumped slightly as it turned onto Interstate 90, headed toward the Cleveland General Hospital. Snow flurries kissed the windshield and melted instantly under the wiper blades. Winter in Ohio was unforgiving, but it wasn't the snow that terrified Richard now. It was the silence. His own. He hadn't said a word in nearly 12 hours, a thick, sterile silence wrapped around him as the fluorescent lights of the ER ceilings slid above like a film reel. Nurses hurried, a doctor called for blood work, and he was wheeled into a curtained bay. The world moved, but he didn't. Not in the way that mattered. The voice that once filled garages, bars, and kitchen tables had vanished. A nurse leaned over him. "Mr. Keller, can you write? Can you nod if you understand me?" He nodded slowly. She handed him a clipboard and a pen. He gripped them weakly. His hand, once firm from years of wrenching bolts and holding whiskey glasses, trembled. The pen hovered for a second before scratching across the page. "Can't speak. Throat feels like glass. Hurts to breathe." The nurse read the message, nodded, and disappeared behind the curtain. He closed his eyes. For a second, maybe more. Darkness wasn't new to Richard. He had lived in it for years. Not the physical kind, but the kind that settled after his wife, Sarah, passed 15 years ago. The kind that crept into his bones through a bottle of bourbon and a pack of Camels each night. It became routine. Wake, smoke, work, drink, sleep, repeat. But this was different. He had always assumed there'd be time to patch things up, time to fix what was broken with Emily, time to say the things he never dared when his pride stood taller than his guilt. Now it seemed like time had caught up, and taken his voice with it. 12 hours earlier, he'd been in his small kitchen, the kind with chipped tile and an old yellowed fridge humming in the corner. He had poured himself a glass of bourbon, his nightly ritual, when the pain hit, sharp, sudden, like someone had driven a blade into the base of his tongue. He dropped the glass. It shattered on the linoleum. He grabbed at his throat, tried to cough, tried to speak. Nothing. He remembered crawling, his hand reaching for the cordless phone, knocking over a stack of old mechanic magazines on the way. His breath came in ragged gasps. He managed to press 9 to 1-1 before collapsing beside the kitchen table he hadn't eaten at in 3 weeks. Now he lay there in a hospital bed, voiceless. He stared at the white ceiling, sterile and blank, like the future, and for the first time in a long time, Richard Keller was afraid. A day passed, maybe 2. Richard wasn't sure. Hospitals had a way of making time feel slippery, like everything was happening and nothing was happening all at once. The rhythmic beeping of monitors blended into the hiss of oxygen tanks, into the low murmurs of nurses exchanging shift notes. It was a symphony of routine, and Richard was just another nameless instrument being wheeled from one test to another. They stuck scopes down his nose, scanned his neck, drew vials of blood until his veins felt hollow. No one said the word, but he felt it hover in the room like a storm cloud. Cancer. A young doctor, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a calm voice, finally gave it shape. "Mr. Keller," he said, pulling the curtain closed, "your scans show a mass in your nasopharynx. That's the upper part of your throat, behind the nose. It's pressing on your vocal cords. That's why you can't speak." Richard stared at him. We'll need a biopsy to confirm, the doctor continued, but it's consistent with a malignancy, likely stage 3 or beyond. The word malignancy echoed like a gavel in his head. Not just a sore throat, not just a lingering cold. Malignancy, stage 3, throat cancer. The penalty for years of cigarettes and whiskey and silence. The doctor asked if he had family to call. Richard shook his head. You sure? The doctor pressed gently. He nodded. He wasn't lying. Not exactly. Emily hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. And even if she picked up now, what would he say? Scratch that, what could he say? The next morning, he woke up to find a dry erase board next to his bed. A nurse had drawn a smiley face on it and written, "You're not alone. Let's get your voice back." He stared at the message for a long time. Later, as he was wheeled down for his biopsy, he passed a hallway with glass windows. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft, quiet, and relentless. He watched a young couple walk past the building hand in hand, their breaths puffing white in the air. The woman laughed, threw her head back. The man pulled her close and kissed her cheek. Richard turned his face away. Memories had teeth, and tonight, they bit hard. 15 years ago, he'd stood outside a similar hospital room, staring into a window just like this one. Sarah was inside, her body frail, her spirit slowly fading like the end of a candle wick. He never cried, not in front of her, not even when the doctors gave the final news. He held it in, like a man was supposed to. He remembered telling Emily, then 16, "You need to be strong now." And Emily, eyes red and voice shaking, had whispered, "I don't want to be strong. I want Mom." He hadn't known what to do with that, so he did what he always did. He left the room. Now, as the gurney rolled past another hallway and the nurse chatted quietly about the weather, Richard wished more than anything for just 5 minutes of voice. 5 minutes to call Emily, to say something different, to not leave the room. The gurney stopped, the lights above blurred. A nurse touched his shoulder. "You okay?" He nodded, just barely. Inside, though, a war had begun, a war between regret and time, and he was already running out of both. The jukebox crackled, just slightly off-key, like always. The bar was half full, humming with the low buzz of laughter and clinking glasses, but Richard only had eyes for the woman standing next to it. Sarah. She was laughing, head tilted, lips parted, eyes alive. Her laugh didn't belong to this dusty Ohio dive bar. It belonged to some brighter place, a place with better lighting, better music, better people. But somehow, she'd chosen to spend her Friday nights here, singing Patsy Cline with just enough whiskey in her blood to hit the notes, but not enough to miss the point. Richard had watched her from the edge of the room for weeks before finally working up the nerve to talk to her. That night, she sang crazy like she meant every word. When the last note faded, he'd walked over, hands in his jacket pockets, heart pounding like a teenager's. "You always sing like that?" he'd said, "or just when someone's watching?" She raised an eyebrow. "Depends who's watching." That's how it began. Back then, his voice was full of confidence, full of humor. He could make her laugh without trying. He could talk circles around anyone at the garage, or at the poker table, or around a fire pit. He wasn't afraid to speak, or shout, or sing, especially sing. He and Sarah used to do Johnny Cash and June Carter duets on karaoke nights. And even though he couldn't carry a tune to save his life, she swore she loved the way he always tried to harmonize. It was laughter that built their home. Music, warmth, and Sunday pancakes. Sarah made the best blueberry pancakes in Cuyahoga County, maybe all of Ohio, if you asked him. Emily used to sit on the counter, watching her mother cook while Richard hummed some old country song in the background, tapping his boots on the kitchen floor. Those were the years that felt like color. But time had a way of turning color into rust. He didn't notice the first signs in Sarah, the bruises that didn't fade, the fatigue she chalked up to just being tired, the way she stopped singing. When she finally agreed to see a doctor, it was too late. Stage 4, it spread fast, and the woman who once lit up a room with her voice began to disappear into silence. Richard tried to be strong. He really did. But grief has a cruel way of slipping through the cracks of men who never learned how to cry. He thought silence was strength. That if he didn't talk about it, it wouldn't break him. But silence is heavy. And it doesn't go away when ignored. It just gets louder. He never told Emily what the doctors said until it was almost over. He thought he was protecting her. But when Sarah died, the silence between father and daughter became permanent. He took to drinking more. The late nights at the garage turned into all-nighters. He stopped singing, stopped laughing. The sound of his own voice started to annoy him. Then came the shouting. Emily tried to reach him at first. She tried to pull him back into the world. She was 17, hurting, and needed a father, but all he could give her were rules, demands, and lectures, none of which came from love, only fear. Fear that if he let his guard down, he'd drown in everything he hadn't said to his wife while she was still breathing. One night, Emily tried to hug him in the hallway. He stepped back. "Don't start crying now," he muttered, voice cold. She didn't try again. Now, lying in a hospital bed without a voice, Richard realized what he had truly lost wasn't his speech. It was his soundtrack. The life he had built with music, laughter, and conversation had been muted long before the cancer came. He had silenced it himself, and now, the silence was permanent. After Sarah passed, the house changed. The curtain stayed closed longer. The music stopped. The kitchen, once the beating heart of the family, became just another room with a fridge and a table nobody sat at anymore. Richard stopped buying blueberries. Pancakes became toast. Sometimes nothing at all. Grief didn't hit him like a train. It seeped in like a slow leak under the floorboards. It showed up in the coffee left half drunk, in the ashtray always full, in the unopened mail, in the apology never spoken. He didn't rage. He didn't collapse. He just dulled. And Emily, bright-eyed, sharp-tongued Emily, tried to fill the void. She tried to bring back life in little ways. A new song on the stereo. A plate of blueberry pancakes on his birthday. An invitation to watch one of those corny rom-coms her mother used to love. But every time, she was met with the same blank wall of half-nods and half-hearted thanks. Then came the whiskey. At first just a glass or two before bed. Then a bottle every few nights. Eventually, Richard didn't need a reason. He just needed the silence that drinking gave him. A silence that didn't ask questions. A silence that didn't cry. His voice, once a comfort, turned sour, loud, sharp. He started barking orders instead of offering comfort. "Clean your room. Turn that damn music down. Don't talk back." It wasn't parenting. It was defense. Emily didn't yell back. She just started disappearing. She'd stay late after school, eat dinner in her room, speak less, smile less. The bright spark in her dimmed, and Richard didn't know how to stop it, so he ignored it. Pretended she was just being a teenager. But in truth, he knew what was happening. She was slipping through his fingers, just like Sarah had. The last real conversation they had was short and ugly. Emily had been accepted into a college out of state. She came home, letter in hand, eyes wide with a hope that Richard hadn't seen in months. "I got in," she said, breathless. "It's a great program. Nursing. Full ride." He didn't smile. "You want to leave already?" he said. "Your mom's barely cold and you're running off?" Her face crumpled in disbelief. "I thought you'd be proud of me. I thought you'd stay and help hold this house together." "No, Dad," she said, voice shaking. "You want me to stay so you don't have to face it alone." She left the room. Left the house 2 weeks later. He didn't stop her. Over the years he left a few voicemails. Birthdays, holidays, usually after a few drinks. None of them were sober enough to land right. She never called back. And eventually, he stopped trying. Until now. Now, every beat of silence in the hospital room felt like punishment. Every beep of the monitor a reminder of the things he never said, the apologies unspoken, the pancakes uneaten, the hugs he never gave. His body was failing, that much was clear. But his heart still beat for the people he lost along the way. He watched the snow fall outside the hospital window, coating the parking lot like a blanket over an unmade bed, and for the first time in years, he whispered, not with his voice, but inside his mind, something he should have said a long time ago. "I miss you, Emily. I miss all of it." Emily Keller had built her life out of clean lines and tight routines. Wake at 6, run 3 miles, shower, coffee, black, clock in at the hospital by 7, 12-hour shift, clock out, go home, eat something simple, salad, maybe eggs. Watch half an episode of something she'd already seen. Sleep. Repeat. There was comfort in repetition, safety in predictability. In her world, there were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no cigarette smoke curling under the hallway light. Just the steady hum of machines, the sterile scent of hand sanitizer, the quiet rhythm of healing. Controlled, contained, clinical. She'd been a nurse for nearly 5 years now, stationed at a mid-size hospital in Chicago. Her patients ranged from elderly stroke survivors to young trauma cases, some grateful, others not. She didn't mind. Emily had always been calm under pressure. Colleagues praised her bedside manner, steady, warm, professional. But no one knew that her calm came from years of learning to survive in the eye of a storm. Her father had been the storm. She didn't hate him, not really. That would be too easy. What she felt was harder to define, like a deep ache you stop noticing after a while, but that flares up when the weather changes. Richard Keller had been a giant in her childhood. Loud, gruff, protective. He had big hands that fixed everything, from broken bikes to leaking faucets, and he used to sing to her at bedtime, off-key but with heart. She remembered lying in bed, listening to his deep voice rumble through the walls as he sang Johnny Cash in the kitchen while making toast. But after her mother died, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. The laughter went first, then the singing, then the softness. What was left was a man who barked orders and drank too much, who couldn't meet her eyes without seeing ghosts. The day she left home for college, she didn't hug him. He didn't ask her to. She hadn't seen him since. She had told herself, time and again, that she was better off, that she didn't need him, that she could build her own life, her own family, far from the shadows of grief and rage. And in many ways, she had. But there were cracks, little ones, like how she always hesitated before answering phone calls from unknown numbers, or how she couldn't listen to old country songs without her chest tightening, or how she never told anyone, boyfriends, friends, coworkers, about her father. It was like he'd been quietly erased from her biography. Until the letter arrived. It came on a Thursday, a regular day. She'd just gotten home, kicked off her shoes, was sipping tea when she noticed the envelope on the counter. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Slanted, heavy pressure, like the pen had to be convinced with each letter. She almost didn't open it, almost tossed it in the drawer with old takeout menus and utility bills. But something, curiosity, nostalgia, guilt, pulled her in. There was no salutation, no Dear Emily, just a short paragraph, shaky but legible. I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you care to read it. I don't expect forgiveness. I barely expect you to finish this page. But if you do, know this. I lost my voice. Not metaphorically, literally. I can't speak. Doctor says it might be permanent. I guess it's what I deserve, but if I could talk, I'd say I'm sorry. Not for what I did, for what I didn't do. If you never respond, I'll understand. But if you ever want to hear a story, just one, I'll find a way to tell it, without words if I have to. Emily read it once, twice, a third time. She felt something break and settle in her chest, like a window cracking under pressure but not shattering. She didn't cry. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and sat at her kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Her mind ping-ponged between anger and confusion, between old wounds and a strange new tenderness she didn't know what to do with. He was sick. That much was clear. She hadn't thought about him in months, at least not consciously. But now his voice, gravelly, worn, undeniably his, echoed in her mind even though she knew he couldn't speak. She called the hospital the next morning, using the information on the return address to track him down. The nurse on the phone confirmed. Richard Keller, 63, admitted for stage 3 nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Non-verbal. Prognosis uncertain. Emily didn't say she was his daughter. She didn't know if she had the right to anymore. She booked a train ticket for the following week, took a few days off, told her supervisor she had a family emergency, which was, in its own way, true. On the ride home, she stared out the window at endless stretches of snowy fields, bare trees like fingers scratching at the sky. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, older than she remembered. And in her lap, the letter sat folded neatly, an anchor, a weight, a beginning. She hadn't decided what she would say to him, or if she'd say anything at all. But something had shifted. She wasn't going for closure. She wasn't going for answers. She was going because, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she wanted to live in a world where her father no longer existed. The hospital walls were the color of old snow, white but not bright. Richard sat slouched in the reclining bed, paper-thin gown tied loose around his back, hands trembling slightly as he held the plastic cup of water the nurse had left him. He couldn't drink it. Swallowing felt like dragging glass down his throat. He hadn't spoken in days, not a single sound. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was that he couldn't. Whatever was growing inside his neck had wrapped around his voice like a fist, squeezing tighter with each passing hour. Words lived only in his mind now, bouncing around like moths looking for an exit. The doctor came in mid-morning, holding a tablet and a face shaped for bad news. Dr. Linden, late 30s, smart, clean-shaven, the kind of man who probably jogged before work and read nonfiction for fun. He pulled up a chair, sat down, and said the words slowly, carefully. "Mr. Keller, the biopsy confirms our suspicions. It's nasopharyngeal carcinoma, throat cancer, stage 3. Richard stared. Dr. Linden kept going, like someone who had delivered the same news too many times. The tumor is pressing against your vocal cords and affecting your ability to speak. We'll be starting treatment as soon as we can. Radiation first, possibly chemo after. Surgery isn't off the table, but it depends on how your body responds." Richard reached for the whiteboard next to his bed. His handwriting was sloppy, uneven. "Will I talk again?" The doctor hesitated. "There's a chance. But I won't lie to you, that chance is small. The longer the tumor compresses those nerves, the harder it is for them to recover. Even if we shrink it, your voice might not come back." Richard didn't write anything else. The doctor placed a hand gently on the edge of the bed. "You're not alone in this, Mr. Keller. We've got a support team, speech therapy, social workers. Anyone you want to talk to, we can get them." He shook his head. "No one to talk to, no one to call, no one left." Dr. Linden nodded, understanding too quickly, and left. The room fell into a hush that wasn't quite silence. Machines hummed softly. A nurse walked past the doorway, her shoes squeaking faintly. Outside the window, the branches of a naked tree scratched lightly against the glass. Richard let his head fall back against the pillow. His throat ached, but it wasn't just physical. There was something deeper now, a weight, a consequence. For years he'd laughed off the warnings, the coughing fits, the acid burn in his chest. He'd waved away Emily's concerned glances when she was a teenager, telling her it was just man stuff. Cigarettes, bourbon, long nights and quiet mornings, a life lived on his terms. Now it was all coming due. He tried not to think about her, but his mind betrayed him. Every corner of this quiet hospital seemed to whisper her name. He imagined her as a child, curled up on the couch watching cartoons, giggling with a mouthful of cereal. He remembered how she used to sing along with the car radio, always off-key, and how Sarah would join in, just to make it a trio of terrible harmonies. They had been a family once, a real one. The image cracked, gave way to something darker. The day Emily left, the way she didn't look back, the sound of the front door closing. He hadn't cried then, hadn't shouted. He just opened the bottle and poured himself a drink. Now years later he was alone with nothing but the echo of that silence. He picked up the pen again, wrote slowly, with care. "Need paper, want to write." The nurse brought him a notepad, a pen that worked, a small nod, no questions. He stared at the page for a long time. It had been years since he'd written anything by hand that wasn't a grocery list or a check. His hands were stiff, rusted. The first line came out crooked. "Emily," he wrote. He paused. That alone felt like a crime, saying her name after all this time. The last time he'd seen her, she was a college freshman, bags packed, fury in her eyes. She'd told him she was done trying to fix something he didn't want fixed. Told him she didn't want to watch him drink himself into a ghost. And she had left. He'd let her. Now he was the ghost. The pen hovered again. "I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you care to read it. I don't expect forgiveness." He scratched that out. Started again. "You probably have every right to ignore this. And if you do, I'll understand. I just needed you to know. I can't speak anymore. Doctor says it may be permanent. It's a strange kind of punishment, isn't it? To lose your voice when all you want to say are the things you never said." He blinked hard. His eyes burned. "I'm sorry. For the silences, for the noise, for the years between us that I filled with anything but love." He stopped. No poetic ending. No grand plea. He folded the page once, carefully, slid it into an envelope. On the front he wrote her name and the last address he had, a place in Chicago, scribbled on a torn envelope from years ago. When the nurse came back in, he held up the letter. She looked surprised, then took it without a word. That night, Richard didn't sleep. He watched the lights flicker outside the window, listened to the beeping of the machines, and imagined the letter making its way through snow-covered streets, past mail sorters, across state lines. He didn't expect an answer, but for the first time in years, he hoped. The train pulled into the station with a low groan of brakes and a gust of cold air that snuck through Emily's coat collar. She stepped off slowly, unsure if her legs felt heavy from the ride or from everything waiting on the other side. The platform was quiet. A light snow had begun to fall, soft, steady flakes that clung to her hair and eyelashes. It smelled like salt, steel, and something achingly familiar. Home. She hadn't said that word in years. The ride to the hospital was short, but it felt long. Each street held a memory. The gas station where she bought her first soda with pocket change. The park where her mother used to push her on the swings. The overpass where she and her best friend used to sit and dream about leaving this place behind. She passed the corner liquor store where her father used to send her for cigarettes. He never said thank you, but he always gave her the change. Back then she'd thought it was kindness. Now she knew it was guilt. The cab dropped her at the front entrance of the hospital. She didn't go in right away. Instead, she stood under the awning, watching people come and go. Visitors with flowers, nurses with tired eyes, a man holding his sobbing wife by the shoulders. Life and death danced freely here, in automatic doors and plastic chairs. She sat on a bench near the entrance and pulled out the letter again. She'd read it a dozen times, maybe more, and yet each word still carried weight. I lost my voice. The irony didn't escape her. The man who had once filled rooms with his presence now reduced to paper and pen. She wondered if that was what it took for him to finally listen, to himself, to others, to the silence he'd drowned for years in smoke and bourbon. Emily stood after a long while. She walked through the hospital doors, her boots clicking quietly against the linoleum floor. She moved like a visitor to a museum, careful, hesitant, not sure what she was allowed to touch. At the front desk, she hesitated before giving her name. She simply asked for Richard Keller's room number, her voice flat, steady. The receptionist didn't ask questions, just pointed. Room 312, third floor, oncology. The elevator ride felt like hours. Her reflection in the mirrored doors looked paler than usual, older, not quite the daughter who left, but not yet the woman who had come back. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and lemon-scented cleaner. Nurses moved quietly. Carts squeaked, monitors beeped. She found the room without needing to check the number twice, but she didn't go in. Instead, she stood just to the side of the doorway, peeking in through the small rectangular window. The blinds were half drawn, but there was enough space for her to see. He was sleeping. At least, she thought he was. His mouth was slightly open, one arm limp across his chest. There were tubes, machines. A pale blue blanket pulled up to his ribs. But it wasn't the medical equipment that hit her hardest. It was how small he looked. Her father had always seemed larger than life. Even when he was yelling, drinking, breaking apart, he had presence. He filled up space. Now he looked folded, dimmed, like someone had taken all the fire out of him and left only the embers. She felt something shift in her chest, something sharp and tender, all at once. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't justice. This was sadness, pure and human. Emily stayed there for a long minute, maybe more. She didn't cry. She didn't open the door, not yet. But she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old photo, one she'd carried for years without realizing why. It was of the three of them, her mother, vibrant and laughing, her father, grinning awkwardly, and her, about 8 years old, missing a front tooth, arms wrapped around both of them. She slid the photo under the door, then turned and walked away, her heart pounding louder than the quiet behind her. The sound that woke him wasn't loud, a soft scrape, barely more than a whisper, as something slid across the linoleum floor near the door. Richard's eyes fluttered open. For a second, he wasn't sure where he was. The sterile lights, the chemical smell, the rhythmic beeping beside him. Then it all came rushing back. The diagnosis, the silence, the letter, and now, something new. He shifted, slow and stiff, muscles aching with the dull weight of sleep and illness. He turned his head toward the door. At first, he saw nothing, just the familiar outlines, chair, IV pole, tray table. But then, just near the foot of the bed, something out of place. A photograph. He stared at it for a long second before swinging his legs over the side of the bed, groaning softly at the effort. His balance was off, the world slightly tilted, but he managed to stand and shuffle forward with the IV dragging behind him like a reluctant shadow. The photo was old, curled at the edges. The colors had faded, but the moment it captured was still alive. Sarah, him and Emily. Emily, missing a front tooth, cheeks flushed with joy, arms wrapped tightly around both her parents. Sarah's eyes were shining, mouth mid-laugh, and he was grinning wide, squinting against the sun, one hand resting on Emily's shoulder. It was a 4th of July picnic. He remembered that day, not because anything special had happened, but because it was one of those rare, perfect afternoons where time seemed to pause. Burgers on the grill, lemonade in mason jars, fireworks later that night. He'd lifted Emily onto his shoulders so she could see above the crowd. He lowered himself slowly into the chair beside the bed, the photo trembling in his hand. She had been here, not a nurse, not a volunteer. Emily. He didn't know how long she had stood at the door, didn't know if she'd seen him asleep, if she'd hesitated or run. But she'd come. That much was undeniable, and she'd left him this, a bridge, fragile, but real. His throat ached not from the cancer, though that pain never left, but from something else, something deeper, regret maybe, or longing, or just the overwhelming sensation of having been seen. He looked around the room, searching for the notepad. When he found it, he opened to a blank page and stared at it, pen hovering. For once, he didn't try to write something poetic or polished. He didn't try to explain away the years or excuse what he had done or hadn't done. He just wrote what he felt. I saw the photo. Thank you. Then beneath it, you were always the best thing I ever had. He stared at the words, heart thudding in his chest, not from fear this time, but from something tender and unfamiliar. Hope. He folded the note and tucked it inside the frame of the photo, placing both gently on the bedside table where she'd see it if she came back. He had no way of knowing if she would, but for the first time in years, he had left the door open. And that somehow felt like enough, for now. The fever came like a thief in the night. One moment Richard was sitting in his hospital bed, thumbing absently at the corner of the photograph Emily had left. The next, his body was shivering so hard he could barely keep the cup of water from spilling. Sweat drenched the back of his neck. His skin burned, then froze, then burned again. The world tilted, shadows lengthened, and sound grew muffled like he was underwater. By the time the nurse came in for the routine vitals check, his temperature had spiked to 103.6. Blood pressure dropping. Breathing shallow, she didn't wait. The code was called within seconds, ICU. Everything after that came in flashes, fluorescent lights, the blur of ceiling tiles racing overhead, cold hands on his chest. Wires, needles, the sharp sting of oxygen forced through his nostrils. Someone saying his name over and over, but far away, like calling through fog. Mr. Keller. Mr. Keller, stay with us. But he was slipping. In his mind, he was somewhere else entirely. It was warm. Summer, maybe. There was music, soft and distant, like a memory being sung back to him. A woman's laughter floated on the air, and then she appeared. Sarah. She looked like she had the day they first met. Hair tied back, white dress fluttering just below the knees, barefoot in the grass. She smiled like she had always known he'd come. He tried to speak to her, but of course he couldn't. Even here, in this memory or dream or whatever this was, his voice wouldn't come. She walked closer. You always had a hard time saying the things that mattered, she said, her voice warm and teasing, like a balm over his skin. But you felt them. That's why I stayed. He wanted to hold her, to fall at her feet, and apologize for everything, for dying inside after she left, for pushing their daughter away, for not fighting harder to stay soft. But all he could do was reach toward her, hand trembling. She took it. She came, you know, Sarah whispered, her thumb tracing the back of his hand. Emily, she still loves you. She's just afraid of not being loved back. His chest ached, not from sickness, but from the weight of all he had never said. I miss you, he tried to mouth, but the words disappeared before they formed. I know, Sarah said gently, but I'm not the one who needs to hear it. The dream began to dissolve, like dust caught in sunlight. Her hand slipped from his, the warmth faded, the music quieted, then came the cold, and the machines, and a voice, Dad? It was faint at first, then firmer. Dad, it's me, Emily. She was there beside him, her hand wrapped around his. He couldn't open his eyes, but he felt the pressure, the presence, the unmistakable gravity of someone who mattered. Her fingers were smaller than he remembered, but strong, grounded. You're scaring me, she whispered. You don't get to do this. Not after sending that letter, not after the photo, Not after making me come all this way. He wanted to squeeze her hand, to tell her he was trying, that he didn't plan for this, that he wasn't ready to go. Not yet. I'm mad at you, she continued, voice cracking. I've been mad at you for years, for checking out, for leaving me with a ghost, for making me the adult when I was still a kid. But you know what? She exhaled sharply. I still came. I still care. I don't know what that means yet or what comes next, but I'm here. Something in his chest loosened, like a locked door creaking open. She brushed his forehead gently. Just come back, okay? We're not done yet. The nurse came in shortly after and quietly confirmed that his vitals were stabilizing. Emily stayed the entire night, curled up in the ICU chair with a hospital blanket draped over her. She didn't sleep much. Mostly she watched him breathe, in and out, in and out. In the morning, his eyes fluttered open. She was the first thing he saw, and for the first time, he didn't look away. She leaned in. Hey, she whispered, like speaking to something fragile. His lips parted. No sound came, but his mouth moved slowly, deliberately. Thank you. It wasn't clear if she read his lips or just knew what he meant, but she smiled anyway, tears welling in her eyes. Then, without hesitation, she reached for the small whiteboard the nurse had left at the bedside. She handed him the marker, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he didn't write about his pain, or ask about meds, or scrawl a bitter joke. He wrote one word: stay. Emily reached over, placed her hand on his and nodded. I will. Recovery was not linear. It didn't come in neat stages or triumphant moments. It came in inches, in slow mornings and uncomfortable silences, in clumsy movements and awkward eye contact, in scribbled words on paper, and long pauses filled with the sound of machines breathing. But it came. Richard spent the next few weeks in a different kind of quiet, not the heavy silence of regret, but something softer, an unspoken understanding that maybe not everything had been lost. Emily visited every day. Sometimes she brought coffee, even though he couldn't drink it yet. Sometimes a newspaper. Once she brought him a book of crossword puzzles and a small pencil sharpener, like she used to give him for Father's Day when she was little. The old kind of gifts, useless and precious at the same time. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. She would sit in the chair by his bed, legs curled under her, reading quietly or scrolling her phone. Occasionally she'd look up and catch him staring, and instead of flinching, she'd just smile. A small, cautious smile. The kind that says, I'm still figuring this out, but I'm here. The first time he tried the voice device, he hated it. The machine produced a low, robotic tone, mechanical, soulless. It didn't sound like him, didn't feel like him. He had spent a lifetime using his voice like a weapon, a shield, a song, and now he had this cold, synthetic thing in its place. But Emily encouraged him. It's not about sounding like you, she said gently. It's about being able to say what you need to say. He practiced, slowly, one syllable at a time. The nurses helped, but it was Emily who sat with him for hours, helping him build sentences. The first word he managed on the device, after several frustrating attempts, was her name. She looked up when she heard it, garbled, distorted, but unmistakable. Emily. She didn't cry, but she reached out and touched his hand, squeezing once. That's me, she whispered. As the days passed, Richard began walking again, first with a cane, then without. His weight had dropped, and his face looked older, more sunken, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. He spent time in the patient lounge, sometimes alone, sometimes watching television with other patients. He started to notice things. An elderly man who never got visitors, a young woman reading the same book over and over, a nurse who sang softly under her breath while changing IVs. He watched people. Not the way he used to, through a fog of his own distractions, but really watched. And slowly he began to speak to them, in the only way he could, writing notes, tapping words into the voice device, giving a thumbs up, a nod, a presence. One afternoon he wrote a small message on a sticky note and left it on the nightstand of the man next to him. You're not invisible. I see you. You matter. He didn't expect anything in return, but the next morning, there was a folded napkin on his tray. On it, in shaky handwriting, thank you. First time I've smiled in weeks. Emily noticed the change too, not just in his body, but in the way he carried himself. She saw him reach out to people, saw him make space, saw him become something she hadn't seen since she was a child. Present. One rainy afternoon, they sat together in the hospital's small garden courtyard. She pushed his wheelchair slowly between rows of blooming chrysanthemums, the rain misting gently through the overhead awning. "It's weird," she said suddenly, "being here, like this, with you." He nodded. She tucked her hands into her coat pockets. "I used to think you didn't love me." His hand tensed around the blanket in his lap. She looked at him, eyes soft. "I know better now, but back then I didn't. I thought I wasn't enough, that maybe I reminded you too much of her." He opened his mouth, but the device wasn't fast enough to catch the words he needed. So instead, he reached into his lap and picked up the small whiteboard they kept with them now. He wrote slowly, "You were everything. I just didn't know how to keep anything." She read it, swallowed hard. "That's not true," she said, her voice breaking just a little. "You're keeping this, right now, this moment." He looked at her, really looked. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a woman, strong, wounded maybe, but whole. And somehow, in all his failure and silence and distance, she had become someone remarkable, someone who had come back. That night, back in his room, she brought out a small photo album. "I found this in Mom's old box," she said. "Want to look?" He nodded. They flipped through it slowly, page by page. Summers at the lake, birthdays, Christmas mornings. A blurry shot of him and Sarah slow dancing in the kitchen. Emily in a tutu at age 4, holding a wooden spoon like a microphone. Him behind her, pretending to be her backup singer. They laughed. They didn't need perfect sound. The photos filled in what the words couldn't. Before she left that night, she stood at the doorway, hand on the knob. "You ever think," she asked, half smiling, "that sometimes we have to lose everything to figure out what really matters?" He tapped into his voice device. The machine buzzed for a second, then said, "Not everything. I didn't lose you." She turned back, eyes glistening. "No," she said, "you didn't." And for once, the silence between them didn't hurt. It held. Richard left the hospital on a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp, the sky a soft gray, and the sun broke through just enough to cast faint golden lines across the sidewalk. He stepped out slowly, one hand gripping a cane, the other resting lightly on Emily's arm. There was no grand ceremony, no clapping nurses or celebratory balloons. Just a man, a daughter, and the silence between them, no longer empty, but full of something that felt a lot like beginning again. He moved into a small ground-floor apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a narrow porch that looked out onto a patch of grass barely wide enough to call a yard. But it was quiet, safe. A place to start over. Even if late, Emily visited often. She brought groceries, changed his sheets, helped set up the voice device and Wi-Fi. But more than that, she brought warmth, stories from work, photos from old albums, a kind of presence that didn't demand conversation but offered companionship. Sometimes they just sat together. No TV, no phone, just being in the same space again. Richard started writing. At first, it was just for himself, scraps of memory, thoughts that had no place to go, but Emily encouraged him to share them. "You've got something to say," she told him, "and now you finally know how to say it." He started a blog. The title came from one of their early hospital conversations, Voice Without Sound. He wrote about recovery, about silence, about what it meant to rebuild trust brick by fragile brick. He shared what it felt like to lose something so central to who you were, and then realize that maybe, just maybe, you'd put too much of yourself in that thing to begin with. People started reading, then commenting. Some shared his posts. A few wrote back with stories of their own, survivors of cancer, estranged parents, adult children who still carried the weight of silence. He responded to every one, slowly, carefully, like each word was a bridge he didn't want to break. One afternoon, Richard and Emily sat on the porch sipping tea. The grass was overgrown and the air smelled faintly of rain, but neither seemed to mind. "I've been thinking," she said, tracing the rim of her mug, "about bringing someone to meet you." He raised an eyebrow. She laughed softly. "Relax, it's not a man. Not yet, anyway." Then, after a pause, "It's Chloe." Richard froze for just a second. "Your daughter?" He typed on the device. Emily nodded. "She's 4 now, bright, wild, obsessed with dinosaurs and peanut butter sandwiches." He stared at her, stunned. "I didn't tell you before," she added, almost apologetically. "It didn't feel right. I guess I thought you hadn't earned that part of me yet." He nodded slowly. He understood. "She knows about you," Emily said. "Not everything, but she knows you're her grandfather, that you were sick, That you're getting better. Richard's hands trembled as he tapped the next message. Does she want to meet me? Emily smiled. She asks all the time. That Saturday, Chloe came barreling into his life like a whirlwind in pink sneakers. She had curly brown hair tied up in a messy ponytail and carried a stuffed triceratops under one arm like it was a prized possession. When she saw Richard, she paused, just for a moment, then walked right up to him. You don't talk? She asked, eyes wide. He shook his head. Mommy said you used to sing, she continued, climbing onto the porch step beside him. Do you still remember the songs? He nodded. She grinned. Good. Then you can teach me. And just like that, a new kind of soundtrack began. They played with puzzles, read picture books, drew chalk dinosaurs on the walkway. Chloe talked enough for both of them, her words filling the space with color. Richard responded with nods, exaggerated expressions, and occasional words from the device, just enough to let her know he was listening. One afternoon, she brought him a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, crude, bright, beautiful. 3 stick figures, a girl, a lady, and a man with a cane. Above them, in crooked letters, me plus mom plus papa. He stared at it for a long time before tracing the word papa with his finger. No one had called him that before. Emily watched from the porch door, arms crossed, smiling quietly to herself. That night, as Chloe slept in the spare room and Emily washed dishes, Richard sat at the small desk in his living room and opened a new page in his blog. This one would be different. He didn't write about cancer, or silence, or regret. He wrote about the sound of little feet on the floor, the joy of hearing someone laugh without fear, the power of being seen, not as who you were, but who you've become. He titled the post, What I Found When I Stopped Speaking. When he finished, he looked out the window. The sky had turned violet. The stars were just beginning to blink into view, and for the first time in his life, Richard Keller felt like he didn't need his voice to be heard. He just needed to be there. The studio wasn't much to look at, just a small glass booth tucked behind the local library in town, with mismatched foam panels on the walls and a cluttered desk covered in microphones, wires, and empty coffee cups. But to Richard, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. Emily had found the community podcast through a friend. Voices Unheard, it was called, a local project where people told stories no one ever asked to hear, survivors, immigrants, recovering addicts, veterans, people who had been silent too long, people learning to speak again. When she suggested it, Richard hesitated. At first he thought, what could I possibly have to say that matters anymore? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe the story wasn't just for others, maybe it was for him, maybe it was for Chloe. He spent a week drafting it, sentence by sentence. He typed it out on the old laptop Emily had brought over, then he rehearsed it on his voice device. Each line, each pause, each word shaped not by breath but by intention. And now, here he was. A young producer with headphones nodded from behind the glass. You're good to go, she said. Just start when you're ready. Richard looked down at the script, then at the microphone in front of him. He adjusted the speaker strapped across his throat, powered it on, and pressed play. The robotic voice filled the room, but somehow it still sounded like him. My name is Richard Keller. I'm 64 years old. I'm a father, a widower, a mechanic, and once upon a time, I was a man who believed silence was strength. I lost my wife 15 years ago. I lost my daughter shortly after, not to death but to disappointment, and then finally, I lost my voice to cancer. Funny how it took losing everything I used to be to finally understand what really matters. You might be listening to this while folding laundry, or driving home, or lying in a hospital bed like I once was, wondering if anyone gives a damn about your story. Let me tell you, someone does. For years I drowned in anger and guilt and bourbon. I said the wrong things, or worse, said nothing at all. I let the people I loved feel alone because I didn't know how to be present. I thought providing was enough. I thought being tough was love. I was wrong. The last words I ever spoke with my real voice were probably something meaningless, a complaint, a cough, maybe a curse. But now, with this borrowed voice, I want to say something that matters. To my daughter, who stood by my bed when I couldn't speak and held my hand anyway. I see you. I hear you. I love you. To my granddaughter who gave me a name I didn't know I was worthy of, Papa, I'll spend the rest of my days trying to live up to it. And to you, whoever you are, don't wait for a diagnosis, or a tragedy, or a lost voice to speak the truth. Tell someone you love them. Apologize, forgive, sing, scream, whisper. Just don't go silent. Because sometimes, the most powerful voice is the one that comes after the silence. And when the recording finished, the producer gave him a thumbs up and wiped at her eyes without trying to hide it. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Richard nodded. He didn't need applause. He just needed to know it was out there. The episode aired a week later. Emily sat beside him on the couch as they listened, Chloe on the floor coloring dinosaurs. When the mechanical voice came through the speaker, Chloe looked up. "That's you," she said. Richard nodded. She tilted her head. "It doesn't sound like you." Emily smiled. "It sounds like his heart." Later that night, after Chloe had gone to bed, Emily found a letter on the kitchen table, her name on the front. Inside, Richard had written, "If anything ever happens, and I'm not around, let her know I was never more proud of anything than being her grandfather, and your dad, even when I didn't show it." Emily pressed the letter to her chest and let herself feel the full weight of it. The sorrow, the redemption, the truth. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves. Inside, there was peace, the kind that came not from forgetting, but from forgiving. Richard sat in his chair by the window, watching the stars. His voice device lay on the side table, powered off. Tonight, he didn't need it. He had already said everything that needed to be said. And sometimes, the quiet that follows love is the loudest sound of all. Sometimes, we think we have forever to say the words that matter most. But life has a way of reminding us that silence doesn't protect us. It only delays the healing. In the end, it wasn't Richard's voice that saved him. It was his presence, his willingness to show up, to listen, to be human again. Maybe that's the greatest gift we can offer each other. Not perfect words, but real ones. Not speeches, but a hand held, a chair pulled closer, a letter sent even when it's too late. Picture this. A man once defined by what he couldn't say, now watching his granddaughter draw dinosaurs on the porch, surrounded not by noise, but by belonging. That, perhaps, is what healing sounds like. Now let me ask you, is there someone in your life you've been meaning to talk to? A conversation you've delayed? A letter you've never written? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video. And hit subscribe to hear more powerful human stories, told not just with words, but with heart.